Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is November 16th, 2020, and this is episode 121 of Transmission.
121. It's amazing, really. Yeah. Oh, and I have to give a shout out. I don't have permission to publicly say who it is, but I won't. But we got a donation after our appeal on Friday, so very grateful for that. And feel free to send more.
Yeah. we like money.
Yeah.
For things.
Yeah. You gotta at least have a little bit of it.
Yeah, we're not greedy. It's just paying for some things would be good. But just to introduce ourselves, I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. So tell us about the sad little puppy. Sad little puppy icon.
Yeah, that was the best picture I could think of for I'm sorry.
That was cute.
Little puppy. Cute little puppy. But the story that to kick things off is not about a cute little puppy. It's more about a sad old man named Charles Koch of the infamous Koch brothers. So the Koch brothers, for those who might not pay attention to all the ins and outs, they're kind of like the George Soros, but for the Republicans. They are the billionaires that have spent millions upon millions to try to influence American public policy in their favor, kind of their right-wing Tea Party-ish kind of mentality. And Charles Koch, just over the weekend, was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal saying, I messed up. We messed up. I'm sorry. And so his whole thing is he feels bad because of all the partisanship that he's invested into and how it's contributed to a polarized America. And so, of course, people will be like, well, you know what? He's trying to do good. We need to encourage him. Thank you, Charles Koch. And I honestly think apologies without substantive reparations is actually harmful. It's not just kind of not enough. It's actually harmful because it justifies them, and then it shames everybody else into having to feel like they need to accept his apology without seeing any real evidence of repentance or reparations or change.
Right. And I think a very key part of this story, just to add to your introduction, is that, so where did the Koch brothers get all their money, right? We may ask. We just hear about they have all this money and they're spending all this money. Well, Koch Industries is an energy company. So largely oil and gas, chemicals, those kinds of things, but largely oil and gas.
Yeah, and they got their fingers in some other stuff like transportation, but they're really in the they really got their fingers in the things that are killing the earth.
Right. And so we've now had this election. Now, isn't it convenient that his repentance comes right after the election?
Yeah, if he had apologized 2 months ago, that could have influenced the election, and then that would have been at least an indicator of change.
Right. But the fact that he is now sorry after the election, when Trump has lost, when we're getting a new administration who at least thinks climate change is real, they're not really like any kind of climate radicals by any means.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
I mean, I just have to laugh, right? Again, this idea of Joe Biden being a radical is, I mean, if one just doesn't start laughing when how you can even say that with a straight face is beyond me. But
I would so love that. Like if everything bad the Republicans said about Biden were true, like every last thing, I'd be So I'd be laughing with joy so hard that I'd crap myself. But that's not what
so we
reality
don't
is.
want that to be true then.
No.
I
I'm willing
do not
to
want
I'm willing
that
to go
happen.
through that if it's for the greater good, Dan. But yeah, so they need to get in bed with the Democratic establishment
Yeah.
so that they can have an influence in policy for their
Right.
benefit. The
Right,
cookies,
because
these people, yeah.
here's the thing is that you may have all these politicians and these Fox News drone types saying that climate change is not real, but everybody who's actually in the industry, well, pretty much everybody behind the scenes, everybody knows it's real, right? I mean,
Yeah, the
that's
oil industry people they knew it was real before most of the rest of us because they actually
right.
study that crap.
Yeah, so they know that this is real, and they
Yeah.
know that these industrial changes are coming, and they know that gas and coal and all these things are going to be going out, and they need to make money off of whatever the new thing is, and so yeah, they want to have influence writing legislation, things like, how long is it going to take to transition to carbon neutral, and what do different industries have to do in order to do that? And, can you substitute gas for this, that, or the other thing? And how much are carbon credits going to be worth? And, these are all policy things that are going to get written into legislation in the next, decade. And he wants to get in front of all that stuff. And so, what better way than to come out and say, I did the wrong thing by inciting right wing psychosis in America? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And so, what looks on the surface to be an act of attrition or contrition, not attrition, is actually him diversifying his portfolio.
Right.
I mean, really, that's what it is. He's like,
Yeah.
I have to hedge and try to find a way to make money no matter what happens in the future. And I might influence policy to away so it doesn't move away from oil so quickly, and also find ways to make money off of what it's moving towards so that I win on all sides.
And so this is one example of many of these kinds of pivots that these billionaires do and have done over the last several decades.
Mm-hmm.
And what is very annoying is that so-called liberals fall for this crap all the time. I mean, I have seen so many people who are like, ding dong, the witch is dead, Charles Koch is now a nice guy kinds of posts. And I'm just like, what you really believe this stuff? But people do. And I'll pity the poor nice billionaire who's suddenly giving up all his money, right? This was the other great scam. Warren Buffett has this pledge. I forget what it's called. It's got some cute name, give away all your money. The billionaires are doing all this stuff for charity, and this has been going on for a while. And somebody finally looked up some figures on these people's net worth who signed this pledge. Not a single one of them have a lower net worth than when they signed the pledge. They all have a higher net worth.
Yeah. It's funny, like, there's a couple of things that I think we can talk about today. One is the wealthy, and then second is what forgiveness and then apologies look like. But before we get to some of that other stuff, like one of the memes that's CPI is most known by people on social media for are memes, right? And one of the memes we put out is it's got some quote from the prophet saying like, woe to the doers of wickedness. They need to turn towards life before death comes for them. Some kind of like that kind of, the standard boilerplate prophetic thing against the powerful. And I have that quote, which I wish I knew it off the top of my head what it is, with superimposed with these pictures of billionaires, including Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. I think maybe like Bill Gates is certainly in there. And so every time I post that, someone gets upset that I would dare suggest that
Mark,
Bill Gates
so mean.
That Bill Gates is somehow wicked. Like someone posted like last week, the last time this meme came up, saying, are you saying all these people are evil? I'm like, no, there's nothing in there that says they're evil. I'm saying they're doing evil. Like, but what about all the good that blah, 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 blah. And this is the trick of the powerful. It's like, they're not, a billionaire doesn't do more good than the collective power of like thousandaires that if you combine them together have the same collective wealth. Like there's nothing beneficial about concentrated wealth like that. Like in any metric, like you look at how much charity, all the things, billionaires having concentrated wealth doesn't help anything except for they get to enforce their policies upon the world through something called philanthropy. Philanthropy is a way of affecting change the way that they want to see it. And so sometimes it does good, but that doesn't mean like, oh, thank God that Bill Gates is the one who has billions of dollars. Like that sort of logic. We need to break that thinking of seeing them just as mere human beings who are trying to do the right thing with their resources, the way you and I would look at our checkbook ledger and say, what can I use this for? It's a totally different thing. It's not the same thing at all.
Yeah, and just to give one very concrete example of this, and particularly because so many of these billionaires are concentrated in Seattle. So my future daughter-in-law, Emily, is an ER nurse in Seattle. And right now it's really terrifying. And 11 months into this pandemic, and she and her ER colleagues still do not have enough personal protective equipment. Now, if having all these billionaires was so great and they all live in your city, wouldn't you think the hospitals by 11 months into the pandemic, I mean, okay, 1 month we'll forgive you, 2 months we'll forgive, 11 months into the pandemic, wouldn't you think they would have enough proper masks in a hospital in this part of the world? But they don't, right? And that's just one of any number of examples that we could put out that indicate that this, exactly what you're saying, that this concentration of wealth is indeed wicked. There is nothing good about it.
It's evil. It brings evil to the world. It causes harm. A couple of comments from Ceres, always with good thoughts. Why don't energy companies just started support energy independence before neoliberalism nonsense instead of dragging their feet? So yeah, these companies should. They got to put their money where their mouth is. Like, and this is the thing, we get snookered. The whole Democratic Party is totally, again, we could bash on Democrats all day. They go along with all this. They enable all of this. And so anytime there's any talk of some sort of Green New Deal, which itself is a moderate position, the Green New Deal is far from radical to begin with, the way it's been put out. Anytime it comes out, they kill it. They don't really... No. They're not really interested in the future of your family, right? Ceres writes, we had an opportunity to figure out how to better steward oil and gas for about a century. That's right. And we blew it with the monopoly of the car industry.
Yeah. I mean, the monopoly of the car industry, I mean, what we don't know about American history is always impressive. I think most people still do not realize that we actually had good rail transportation in this country. We had great streetcars in this country. And what happened was that the auto industry bought up all the stuff and pulled up all the tracks.
No, it was a big thing. Minneapolis had a streetcar system. Like
Los Angeles actually had public transportation. I mean, you go there now and it's unimaginable, right?
I can imagine that.
But they had this great streetcar system. General Motors bought it and tore up all the tracks. And so lots of opportunities passed by.
Susan writes, I watched the Greta Thunberg doc on Hulu this weekend. That girl called out the powerful for their greed of the everlasting green economy over the climate crisis. Most people do not see reality with Greta's clarity. It's interesting, like how she's become a figurehead for this movement. There's lots of folks that have been saying similar things. And it's like no one listens to them. Like they're starting to listen to Greta, but I feel like the way that people are handling her is kind of, she's been managed too much. So I'm kind of curious. I've been afraid to watch that because I don't want whoever's behind that, who's funding that, to diminish what she's actually saying. So it's good to hear that you're recommending it. Adam writes, if you got $1 in your pocket, eat a taco. $10, buy some peanut butter and some bread. If you got 100 or 1,000, you can stock up. But 1 million may as well be human flesh. Is that a quote from?
Yeah, he's quoting somebody.
Are you quoting yourself? Is that something from something you put out, Adam? I'm not sure where that came from.
Yeah, well, and this gets to one thing that my son Sam and I have often spoken about. This is that, and we talked about this in the episode where we looked at the issue of big numbers in the pandemic. People do not understand big numbers, right? And so when you get much above 1 million, people do not get the order of magnitude, right? And so, and this came up in the Democratic debate, right? where what's his name, Bloomberg, compared his 63 billion to the fact that Bernie Sanders has $2 million.
Yeah, and I see that people bring that up all the time. Like they're all the same. They're the 1%.
It's like, that the fact that even flies is indicative of this. That you do not even imagine how much $63 billion is. And that there's no comparison, right? It's as if saying I have $1,000 and you have a penny and we have the same amount of money. And so the amount of money that these people have and what can be done with that, if that was evenly distributed, is so far kind of out of our understanding of this, that we then make all these bizarre and ridiculous statements, as if we're kind of seriously talking about money.
Well, and a lot of this is just obscured by all these just dumb myths that we have in our society. Like people just were taught to think of someone like Jeff Bezos as a hyper billionaire through his own creativity and ingenuity, and that him having billions of dollars is kind of a neutral thing. Right. And that he can use the money whatever way he sees fit. And if he uses it more for good than bad, then that's great. Like that's how we think about it. We don't, right. The idea that somehow who was exploited, what was appropriated. Right. And so when these billionaires do nice things and ask us, and we're asked to say thank you, it really is not that different than being told by your abuser that, I'm sorry, you have to take me back in. Like it's an abusive relationship. Billionaires are intrinsically abusive. Like this isn't, if they get to the point that they have billions, there was a chain of abuse to get there. They're not just abusive if they use that 60-some plus $1 billion to do mean things. Right. Like we need to get into our thinking.
Another perfect example coming from Seattle. There was a few years ago, there was this initiative on the ballot. There was going to be a very small corporate tax enacted to house unhoused people. Mm-hmm. And Amazon went to war over this and said, we are going to leave Seattle if this passes, because it would have cost them $100 million a year. And it failed. So, I mean, it's very, very important to understand these dynamics, because we get brainwashed by this all the time, and we actually think that these people have a position or they have some integrity in what they're the stances that they're taking, and it's nonsense. And the other one I bring up all the time, right, is all of these Republicans who've now invested in the marijuana industry. I mean, and these are people, who for decades have destroyed communities, sent millions of people to jail, advocated this horrendous war on drugs that has, destroyed entire nations in Central and South America. Unbelievable damage wrought on our country and on human beings, and all because supposedly they had this moral stance on this thing. And now that it's obviously going to become legal, they're all buying stock in marijuana companies. They don't give a shit about any stance. It's just, how can we oppress people and make money? That's what they care about.
Adam's clarifying that's an excerpt from a Guante song. I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, I don't know who that is, but I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's a great line for sure. I'm hungry for a taco now.
I want some peanut butter and bread.
Tacos, yeah.
Kathleen writes, at the beginning of the pandemic, I invested in cruise stocks. With the news of the vaccine, my money tripled. I feel guilty, but only slightly. I see how rich people get caught up in this sort of thing.
All right. Good for you. Good thinking, Kathleen. Buy low, sell high.
Gus writes, what about all the good that billionaires like Gates are doing? Like pushing for the move to charter schools statewide in Washington. He dumped money into that privatization scam for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that, and you look at Betsy DeVos, and of course, all the, Dems lionize, make her the big evil. But she's just the tip of the spear. I mean, billionaires have been working to defund public schools now for decades, all over the country. I mean, some of the really big liberals here in Minneapolis are behind all of the funding of charter school movements, trying to get rid of mandates for local schools. I mean, that's been one of their huge targets, of just like, well, our poor children are really suffering by being next to all these, actually poor children in schools. Wink, wink. We're not really talking about black kids, but we really are. And so, people should have choice. I'm a billionaire. I should have choice in everything I do. That's been an enormous thing that's been going on.
It's hard for me, like, when wealthy people feel like they have no choices is funny, but I'm sure it has nothing to do with your property taxes or racism. I'm sure it has nothing to do with those things. Susan writes, you should be thankful for the roof over your head. This is what an abuser says to an abusee. That's exactly the right metaphor.
Right.
You should be grateful for what you have is kind of the logic that is thrown upon us anytime we complain about the wealthy and the powerful. It's like, well, you could be out on the streets of Cuba. You have a roof over your head. You should be thankful. And it's totally an abusive thing. It's a way of keeping us in line and shaming us. You don't like this just in general, like when you're being abused or exploited or oppressed, you don't owe forgiveness at all to them. And if they repent and change their ways, like even then it's like God will be okay if you don't forgive them still. Like your forgiveness, it doesn't have that much power over them. It might be good for you, but this shaming people into forgiving their abusers is horrific, and it needs to stop. Amen. It's toxic Christianity. And and it's always wrapped up. It's this sort of weird neo-Gandhian kind of bundle that you get as like a progressive Christian, where you have to, like, if you say anything, if I say, oh my God, Jeff Bezos is a piece of shit, then somebody will come and say, how dare you dehumanize him? I'm like, the humanity of Jeff Bezos really isn't in question. The evilness of his system is, and he dehumanizes plenty. So like this, we got to stop worrying about people who aren't forgiving enough of their abusers, and start worrying more about calling these powerful and rich people to actual repentance. And if they don't change, then we need to change it for them by appropriating their wealth.
Well, and then even beyond that, not even seeing that the issue is the individuals.
That's
right?
True.
I mean, again, this is the systemic thing, right? I mean, Yeah, they're just people that have figured out, like Kathleen, who now that you're a billionaire, Kathleen, we really want you to step up your donation to the transmission, by the way.
Billions upon
Yeah,
billions.
that uh, they've just gamed the system. They've taken advantage of it. And look, everybody buys into that. I mean, when Trump's taxes finally got exposed, and, it was what, I don't know, I certainly assumed that he basically wasn't paying any taxes. And he just says, well, look, this is the way the system works. I was just taking advantage of it. And most of America was like, yeah, right, exactly. I would have done the same thing if I was in your situation. And that's the systems phenomenon that we're dealing with. And so, yeah, I mean, these people are just they're just doing what this hyper capitalist economy tells us to do.
Yeah, it doesn't. Billionaires aren't just doing evil because they have evil in their heart. It's the system that creates billionaires is intrinsically evil and unjust. And so, like, to me, this is why it's a hard thing. What Jesus says to the rich young man, and why everyone is shocked by this. Like, who then can be saved? It is hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. That doesn't mean that they're going to hell when they die. That's not how I want to interpret that passage, or anyone I think should. But it really is a big burden. Like, if you have that much power and wealth, the odds of you actually turning it over, selling everything you have and giving it to the poor and living in a righteous way is almost impossible. So the issue isn't to shame Jeff Bezos. Like, if we guilt the billionaires into changing, that's not really going to do much. Really, the repentance we need is systemic, and people who have power should change the system to the extent that they have that power. Got lots of comments coming in. Yeah. Oof! Right at the end, just it's always predictable. Adam writes, it drives me up the wall when people conflate these personalities. Like, Biden is the same as Trump, so it doesn't matter. That sounds like pro-drum of rhetoric pulling the wall. I don't know what that means, that sentence. We lack so much strategy. If you have the option, you have to assess the situation and choose your opponent. If you recognize that, you'll see the differences and make the more effective play. Yeah. It's just thinking a little bit more strategically about how to engage in an unjust system rather than being stuck in moralizing about individuals. Yeah. Gus writes, Amazon spent more money on opposing the head tax, the one that was going to house folks in Seattle, than they were ever going to pay just by paying the tax.
Right. Yeah, they did. And what that proves is really exactly what we're talking about. You see that they understand that a tax on a corporation is a systemic change, because now that is something that the collective is saying to this group, you have to change your relationship to the society. And that's a threat. And that's why they're willing to spend more money than they would pay in a year on the tax to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's the thing that we don't get about philanthropy, is that the thing about philanthropy is that the billionaires are still in total control of that. So this year they feel like, giving to a homeless shelter, but next year they get bored of that and they say, oh, now we want to destroy a school system, so we'll do that. And then the next year they get bored of that. And what happens is, of course, that the people that they get bored of and leave behind are now just stuck in the same, social nightmare that they were in to begin with. And we saw this with Bloomberg with his candidacy. He went all over the country, promised all these people jobs and benefits, and I'm going to pay you through the election no matter what happens, and blah, blah. And then as soon as he got his ass kicked and it was clear that everybody hated him, he just laid all these people off. And, he didn't give a shit about what he'd promised to them. Yeah.
Jim writes, we sent 2 of our kids to a charter school in Edmonds, Washington, and they had the experience of going to school with many Muslims, which expanded their horizons. Not all charter is bad.
Yeah, well, see, this comment, though, is this exact thing of what we're talking about the individual versus the system. Of course, I'm sure some charter schools are great as individual schools, and I'm sure the kids that go to them have very nice experiences. that's just like some individual giving is nice and generous and does a nice thing. But what we're talking about is the bigger problem that the entire charter school movement and the choice school movement is serving to undermine regular neighborhood public schools by taking resources, energy, effort, teachers away from those. And so it's this systemic destruction of public school teaching, which is going on all over the country, and has really accelerated in a place like the South, where you have entire school districts without a white child in them, because all of the white parents have banded together and moved their kids into either private Christian schools or charter schools. And the neighborhood public schools are now just a complete wasteland because they've been almost totally defunded. So,
yep. I mean, everything is complex. And this is this sort of thing, like, again, I'm just repeating myself here, but I feel like it's the sort of thing we need to get drained into our skulls. A good act does not justify a system. Like, so even if Bill Gates spent 90% of his wealth on things that you approve of, it doesn't justify that he has that wealth. And to me, philanthropy is fundamentally undemocratic. Like, I'm an anarchist. I'm not a government guy, but I still trust the government more than an individual, because at least I have some say and power over government a little bit. I have zero power over Bill Gates. And this is where we shame people for, like, well, Mark, then why are you, I see you're using a PC, you're using a Windows PC, you're a hypocrite. Again, this sort of conflation between the small and the big happens all the time. We got to be able to critique systems without, and also think, well, maybe Bill Gates isn't entirely Satan. We can hold both of those views at the same time. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. I don't know if that's an ironic statement or a real statement.
Right.
The workers feed me. I don't bite their hands. Susan writes, Bezos and his ilk are insatiable. Their greed for more knows no end. Again, and that's not even because, like, they might individually be like that, which I have no doubt that they probably are. But our system requires continual expansion. So it's this huge problem that we have to get real about. Like, we have to make it so it's easier for Jeff Bezos to be good by helping him get rid of all that wealth for his sake and ours. Dorinda writes, serfdom and the obligation of the nobility to take care of the serfs because they can't themselves in the nobility system.
Yeah.
Very paternalistic.
Gotta have your serfs. Sort of like Smurfs or something.
Surf and turf. There's puns in there.
Surf and turf, yeah.
Ceres writes, if billionaires care about school choice, they actually would demand to not have public schools run like a factory or prison. Get rid of grade system and standardized testing, support vocational and humanities training in public schools. Yeah, if you had a lot of money and wanted to make schooling better, you could invest a lot and influence a lot towards democratic sorts of change that's better for everyone, not just school choice.
Well, or when something like, and there's so many examples of this. You start looking around, right? This last election, this proposition that passed in California, allowing Uber and Lyft and all these, gig economy companies to not treat their workers as employees, basically, so they don't have to pay Social Security or benefits or anything like that. All that massive amounts of money went into passing that from the side of the billionaires. So, and this gets to, somebody said, okay, well, is there anything Charles Koch could do to prove that he was sorry? I'm like, yeah. So first of all, he could stop funding all the right-wing causes that he is still funding, though he's sorry, he's still funding them. And he could actually start to advocate for policies and support the kinds of, referendums, laws, whatever, that would actually make some changes that would affect his bottom line. So if he were to do that for like a decade, to make up for the decade of crap that he's done, at the end of the decade, I'd be willing to go, okay, yeah, maybe this guy's for real.
So just to be all Jesus-y about this, if you want to look through the Gospel of Luke and Acts and the book of Acts, you have the rich young man as a bad example of rich person not coming to repentance. And then it's followed up by a good example, which is Zacchaeus. Everyone I've defrauded, I'm going to pay them back twice over. And you see, basically he makes right with his money to the point where it maybe even made him destitute, because he realized that if I gain so evilly from this system, I have an obligation to try to correct it, even if it brings me low. Like, I don't want Charles Koch to live in a homeless shelter, but he could probably get by with $2 million and live at the Bernie Sanders rate of existence and still be comfortable. That's comfortable living. Like, if he's just willing to commit to comfortable living, he could do a lot of good with the rest. So it's not like we're asking them to suffer. Heather writes, thank you for saying, yeah, in the sort of penitential, like, kind of, a little suffering can feel a little good, you know. Heather writes, thank you for saying that we don't need to forgive an unrepentant abuser. I hate that attitude among Christians. There's a lot of this going around, and we could get into it. Maybe we should have one about the question of communion, because I see this sort of thing, like how we should be able to have undocumented people and ICE agents come to church because Jesus doesn't keep anyone away. Like that kind of thinking, where somehow Christianity has to be so transcendent that it dismisses the complexity of oppression. Like that happens all the time in Christianity, among the progressive side of things in particular. Norman, the strange new rich bourgeoisie. Yeah. This kind of the new rich, which again, like hardly any of these billionaires started from nothing. So that's another piece. They're not always the new rich. Sometimes they're just kind of like upgraded old rich. Sarah writes, I mean, maybe they just think that diversity is more profitable right now than the Fox News narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Capitalism manipulates narratives to serve its best interests. Yeah, this is where we have to be really skeptical about. Not all ways of talking about diversity are good. Like, if that's what intersectionality was developed as a way of thinking to address, is like, just if you just have the same system but you change the tone of skin of people in the system, that's not exactly racial justice. It doesn't really quite get at it. Gus writes, sure, they were the system. They were the system was developed by maverick educators who wanted to try new things. But now we've added the profit motive to come out of those always being slashed education dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's responding to the charter school comments.
Yeah. Adam writes, prodrome of
equals prodrome.
Okay. That helps a lot. Thanks, Adam. I should have been able to deduce that. I'm sorry. Sarah writes, perhaps we should be wondering why billionaires are changing their narrative. What profit is in it, and how will they use it to further destroy us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the Koch brothers just want a better deal on carbon credits.
Just to throw this in real quick, I can't remember which of the Koch brothers. I think one of them's dead, right? Of the two. There's this documentary on wine fraud that I saw on Netflix, where this guy pretended to be a high-end wine dealer, and he sometimes just buy shitty wine and put new labels on it and everything, like forge them. But one of the Koch brothers like invested millions in fake wine and was suing this guy, and I'm like, that wine has never looked so delicious to me as when I saw that. Let us not conflate the exception with the rule. Thank you for putting that succinctly, Adam. Tony writes, interestingly, the etymology of apology is apologia, which means to justify what you did. Sorry, on the other hand, comes from sorrow, to feel bad with what you did. If all he's saying is he feels bad, there's no need for forgiveness. He's just describing how he feels. And if he feels bad, well, that's only right. Yeah, like, I'm glad he feels bad, but we need more.
I also don't even believe he feels bad.
I don't either. Then you read it and he's like, "Whoops." It's more like the thing of like he made a mistake. Like, well, shit, I probably should have done that a little differently, rather than like, oh man, oh. Nothing comes off as sorrowful. It just be like, well, oopsie daisy. That's how it comes off.
I really appreciate the etymology lesson, Tony.
No, that's cool. Yeah, my seminary focus was on Christian thought and apologetics, which I regret tremendously. So that's also the idea.
Do you feel sorry or are you apologizing?
I'm not making a justification for it at all. I feel lament. So I'm sorrowful. I'm sorry.
All right, we got to finish up. We're way over time.
We're getting worse at this as time goes on. Catherine writes, the other thing many people seem very convinced of is that Amazon or Microsoft would collapse and stop giving us useful services if the profits went equally to the people who do the work instead of mostly to a very few people, which doesn't really make sense. You're right.
No, trickle-down economics does not work.
Yeah, we somehow think ingenuity when it happens is always belongs to the person who owns the company, as though it's not workers that make this possible. Our system acts like those workers are replaceable. The only person who's fundamentally replaceable in a system like that is the person on top, because at a certain point they're just extracting wealth. They're not really adding anything. Adam writes, the best apology is change behavior. And final word from Don Corder. So if Charles Koch stopped funding right-wing causes and started funding left-wing causes, he would cease to be partisan. Well, I don't think there's a problem with being partisan in itself. Yeah. And I don't know, like if he's just funding the Biden campaign, that's just still like depends on what left-wing causes we're talking about.
Right. And we would love him to be partisan in a different direction.
And the other thing is, like, if he were really a left-wing, if he was as far left as I would want him to be, then he wouldn't be able to get by with just funding causes. Everyone over here on the left would be like, you need to give up the right to determine how you fund things.
That's right.
That's the full left-wing thing. So I don't think we'd all be like okay with him if he just started being George Soros about stuff. Like I don't like George Soros either, even if he funds progressive causes sometimes. Anyways.
All right. Well, we will have to get better at reining ourselves in, but we really appreciate all the great comments.
So many great comments. That's why we end up going over.
I know.
So,
and you guys are all awesome.
Thank
Have
you.
a good rest of your day.
And we'll see you next time.